Got this news a week ago or so, but earlier in the month, Dr. Larry Winiarski passed away, and I thought it'd be a great time to honor him. We've talked about him a bit here. Those of you who don't know, Larry Winiarski is really the father of the rocket stove. He was a doctor, a PhD with a doctorate in, I believe, mechanical physics or mechanical engineer. He was born in Honduras, and then his family moved to Kellogg, Idaho in like 1948 when he was like 1 year old or something like that. I'm going to kind of get the details a little fuzzy. But moved to Kellogg, Idaho in the late 40s, which I thought was so cool. I mean, can you guys imagine? I don't know if you know much about Kellogg, Idaho, but I've spent a little bit of time there. You know, it's the little town right outside of Sun Valley. And right then in the 40s, early 50s, Sun Valley was kind of the first, ski area where the Hollywood stars would go and all that. It seems such a cool time and place to be growing up. So he grew up there and then moved around a bit. I think he worked for, I'm going to forget, I don't think it was Lockheed Martin, but it was one of the, Raytheon maybe, one of the major defense contractors, engineering, before he moved to Oregon and started doing the work that would eventually lead to rocket stove work. And I think I will take a quick look at his obituary here, where they give a lot of the details. Yeah, he moved to Oregon, where he worked for the EPA, it sounds like. And in that part of process of working for the EPA is when he came up with the principles of the rocket stove. I hope it says I'm not giving you guys enough data here, but hopefully you guys will catch me. Hopefully I'll just have some little dropouts and we'll pick back up. But at any rate, Larry Winiarski is really the foundation of why we're here. He established so many of the principles of rocket stove combustion. He designed the J-tube rocket stove. He designed, I think, the very first cooking rocket stoves as well. He's just an enormous figure. In his later years, he worked with other doctors at the Provecho Institute, which is Appropriate Technology Institute, and I'm trying to find the other fellow's name, and I'm gonna miss it, but at any rate, he worked with another fellow who came up with the idea of pot skirts and keeping heat in around cooking pots. And together they developed what really today are kind of the foundation for so many humanitarian efforts and so many humans across the globe. The basis for what they cook on these days was founded on Larry's work. And so what I was trying to describe there was the institutional heaters. It's sort of the evolution of the cooking rocket, where we went from sort of L tubes with just a pot sitting over the top, and then maybe J tubes, but where eventually they started to sink that pot down. It started with just a pot skirt and basically sinking the pot into an insulated chamber so that the flue gases can completely surround the pot and heat it from all sides, from the bottom, in a contained fashion. And in the course of doing that, these guys really revolutionized. Prior to where we are now with our heating stoves, they really revolutionized the way people cook all over the world, millions and millions of people. And in doing so, had an enormous impact on air quality in areas where people do cook with solid fuel indoors, usually in poorer countries, and it always had a horrendous effect on people's health, both indoor air quality and outdoor air quality. So the work that he did was just, enormous. And then on top of that, Yanto and others came along after him and adapted his work with these cooking combustion chambers to our, thermal mass, what we talked about before, putting these types of ultra efficient combustion chambers into what were, traditional masonry heater bodies, and kind of coming up with what we believe are, the ultimate in efficiency with regards to home heating, efficiency and comfort and cleanliness and all of those things. So yeah, so really a big deal. Larry's work, his life, and his, everything he contributed. So yeah, as Tall Shadow says, thanks Larry for helping to pave the way for Stove Chat and all of us to be where we are. So I thought that was, a really important guy to honor. And if you get some time, give him a quick Google. He's got a ton of, as I started to kind of search for stuff to talk about, to give some background to what we were doing here, I realized kind of the breadth of his reach. And you'll see just variations on his cooking stoves all over the place. One of the main contributions was he came up with what he calls the 10 principles of rocket stoves. And the idea was that these would be simple, like commandments almost, that he could convey to the people doing the cooking in these third world and various different cultures. He wanted some simple rules to convey to these people so that they could create their own stoves cheaply and easily. And those 10 rules are pretty interesting. They really dovetail nicely with everything we know. And I think we've done these before on the show, but I'll go over one more time because they're so they're just so relevant to what we do here. So the 10 principles of rocket stoves, as according to Larry Winiarski. Now keep in mind, this is specific to cook stoves. Now at the beginning, there's some things that are universal that we could apply to our heating stoves as well, but after a while he gets into kind of specifics for his sort of L-shaped cook stoves as opposed to our J's and whatnot. But rule number 1, insulate, particularly the combustion chamber. So I, of course, find that one particularly poignant. I love insulation around the combustion chamber. And in the combustion chamber, you guys know that's one of my main sticking points, and one of the things I've fought really hard to bring to the forefront. Obviously it's not my rule, it's Larry's rule, but I think that over the course of time, it's so easy to build stoves with heavy bricks, high mass, that somewhere along the way that rule sort of got a little bit diluted maybe. Anyways, we know now that is rule number 1, and it's important. It is probably the most important rule. So insulate, particularly the combustion chamber. And then rule 2, use an insulated upright chimney above the combustion chamber of a height 2 to 3 times the diameter. So he's starting to lay the foundation for the ratios that we use to design rocket stoves. So he wants the riser, the insulated upright chimney, above the combustion chamber to be 2 to 3 times the diameter. So if it's a 6-inch chimney, we want it to be roughly 3 times 6 or 18 inches, which if you put that on top of a 12-inch combustion chamber, you come up with 28. So that's those are the basics for a cooking stove. And we've, of course, stretched those a little bit, but that's the beginnings of the rule of thumb. His rule 3 is heat only the fuel that is burning. In other words, don't, heat a whole bunch of fuel outside of the firebox, which is the original design for those rocket stoves and J tubes with the sticks sticking out. You just have the combusting fuel down deep and the rest of it up and out of there. Maintain good air velocity through the fuel. That's rule 4. So that one we achieve by maintaining good draft throughout the stove and by maintaining cross-sectional area everywhere within the stove. Number 5, do not allow too much or too little air to enter the combustion chamber. Strive to have stoichiometric combustion. So stoichiometric meaning chemically ideal, or the perfect balance between air and fuel. Number 6, the cross-sectional area of the combustion chamber should be sized within the range of power level of the stove. So that's pretty vague. And he says 25 square inches will suffice for home use, which, as we know, a 6-inch chimney is roughly 29 square inches. So he's right in the ballpark there for a 6-inch chimney. And now he starts talking about cooking stoves only. So now he's talking about elevate the fuel and distribute airflow around the fuel surfaces. When burning sticks, it's best to have several sticks close together but not touching, leaving airspace between them. That's accurate for most stuff, but the elevating the fuel doesn't really fit our new types of rockets. Arrange the fuel so that air largely flows through the glowing coals. We do that in our stoves, very much so. Throughout the stove, this is rule 9, throughout the stove, any place where hot gases flow, insulate from the higher mass of the stove body, exposing pots only to direct heat. So this is a pretty neat thing here. He's saying insulate everything except for what you want to get hot. So in the cooking stove, he's talking about the pots, sunk down in an institutional type stove. But this applies to our rocket mass heaters and cook stoves as well. I've been doing quite a bit of consulting lately with folks who are building stoves, and one of the best ways that one can tune a stove to different locations, needs, or whatever is by using insulation in areas where you might want to protect heat or to send heat farther downstream. So for instance, a regular J-tube, the blast of hot gases come out of the top of the riser, and typically we put a cooktop or a barrel over the top and we get heat right out of the top. It's also possible to insulate the top, redirect that riser gases towards the front, and then use a metal radiator, and you can actually get stoves to radiate out into the room like that horizontally. And so that's an example of using insulation strategically to direct the heat where you want. Now you could go on and on with that. You can you can insulate along tops to push heat downstream into benches. You can use insulation to allow you to be able to put cores, combine them underneath materials that might otherwise not work out. So there's a lot of ways to do that, but he's really identifying some crucial elements that we use all the time to tune and customize builds to fit people's goals, and that really is the idea of using insulation strategically. And we have so many options and such great options now. We still have our simple hippie stove type insulation, perlite and clay, or wood ash, things like that. But we now also have ceramic wool, ceramic fiberboard. There's a lot of ways that you can change where the heat goes inside your stove. So I thought that was really cool that Larry identified that really early on. And of course, for making an efficient cook stove, that would be of utmost importance. And then his rule 10 is transfer the heat efficiently by making the gaps as narrow as possible without choking the fire. And again, this is fairly cook stove specific, and he's referring specifically to the gap above the riser to their large stock pot. So he's going to try to get that thing as close as possible without restricting the flow in an effort to heat up the whatever's in the pot as quickly as possible. So those are the 10 rules of rocket stoves as per Larry, and what a great gift he's given us.